Why was it that she felt invisible in a room full of men who measured worth only in noise? The desert had a way of stripping people down, exposing not just sweat and bone but ego and fear. The outpost was nothing more than concrete walls and dust-stained canvas, but inside it pulsed with noise. Boots striking gravel, radios spitting coded bursts, men trading crude jokes like currency. The Black Hawk had barely lifted away before the whispers began. A girl, a rookie, a Marine carrying a rifle that looked larger than she did. She walked through them in silence, duffel digging into her shoulder, a hard case dragging behind her with the slow patience of someone who didn't care to match their rhythm. Some muttered words she caught but didn't answer. Sniper Barbie, she won't last. That's the kind of face they send to recruitment posters, not combat. She didn't flinch, not because she hadn't heard, because she had every syllable logged somewhere deep, where it wouldn't distract but fuel. Sergeant Lily, 23 years old, 5'6", pale freckles on skin that still looked more like college than combat, raven black hair pulled tight under her cap. So tight it almost looked like discipline was all that held it in place. She had no swagger, no war stories, no loud scar to point at, and because of that, she had already been measured and dismissed. But she kept walking. The barracks swallowed her in its dim heat. And that's when Lieutenant looked up. 14 years of combat had carved his face into lines, but his eyes were sharp enough to notice the difference. He didn't see swagger, he saw ritual. The way she laid her rifle out on the bunk wasn't casual unpacking. It was surgical preparation. Every piece lined exact, every motion controlled like a surgeon prepping for a life-or-death procedure. He said nothing, only grunted, then went back to his screen. Another rookie, another theory shooter, perfect scores in school maybe, but in combat. He'd seen perfection collapse under the first scream, the first spray of blood. She would break, he thought they all did. That night while the others gathered around a projection of old fight replays, fists pumping, smoke curling around the wrecked tent, Lily was alone at the range. She didn't fire, not yet, she studied. She felt how the canyon walls bent the wind, how mirage lines shimmered differently as the sun slipped into dusk. She wrote everything down in a leather notebook, the kind most would have left behind at training. She whispered equations to herself, checked and rechecked. As if the landscape itself was a classroom, and she was its only attentive student. A shadow moved behind her, Briggs, Navy SEAL sniper, tall, lean, eyes too sharp to ever miss the chance for mockery. You ever gonna pull the trigger, rookie? She didn't turn at first, only adjusted a ribbon tied to a stake, watching how it twisted in the shifting breeze. When she finally answered, her voice was low, calm. Not until the shot's ready. He scoffed, this isn't a classroom, you wait until ready, you're dead. She said nothing more. Silence was her sharpest blade. With quiet resolve she lifted the from its case, assembled it piece by piece with hands steady as stone, each part locked into place with a click too precise to be accidental. She adjusted the scope, settled into the dirt and breathed. A single shot thundered downrange, 1,200 yards, center. Briggs' smirk faded. Lucky, he muttered, but the word rang hollow. She didn't argue, she didn't stay to savor it. 3 more shots, all center, then she packed up, dusted off, and disappeared into the barracks without waiting for approval, ghost-like, unbothered. And that's how it continued. She became the ghost of the outpost, rarely speaking, eating quickly, training harder, gone before anyone could decide whether to invite her or mock her. They called her ghost not out of respect, but dismissal. They didn't know that while they slept, she sat cross-legged on her bunk surrounded by maps and wind charts, simulating bullets through air the way others dreamed of home. They didn't know she had tied a pencil to her barrel, practicing dry trigger pulls until the balance never shifted, not once. They didn't see her welding scrap metal into silhouettes measured to mimic a human frame at distances no one dared shoot at. Noticed, he passed the range one evening and paused when he saw her take a shot at a target barely visible to naked eyes. He lifted his spotting scope, 2,000 yards. The round landed an inch left of center. She adjusted, fired again, dead center. "Who taught you to shoot like that?" he asked. Still prone, still focused through the scope, she answered, "Math." He laughed. "Math won't save you when the wind changes mid-flight." She turned then, locking eyes with him, not cocky, not defiant, just steady. "No, but knowing the math means I'll know when it will." He studied her, then nodded once and walked away. The base began to shift in small ways. The seals joked quieter when she was near. Some even lingered longer at the range, pretending not to watch while she logged wind patterns with obsessive patience. Briggs stopped mocking her outright, though the resentment still clung like sweat. She hadn't won them over, not yet, but the silence around her was no longer empty. It was wary. Still, doubt ran deeper than any respect earned on paper. She had never been under fire, never faced a moving target that bled and screamed. She was still a rookie, a girl with math. The first crack in their certainty came during a joint training exercise. She was paired with Briggs again. His annoyance was obvious, like being assigned to her was punishment. The scenario: overwatch at a mock village, 1,000 yards out, identify and neutralize hidden targets, 5 minutes. Briggs went first, his voice sharp, confident. 2 tangos rooftop left, 1 center street with AK, sequence left, right, center. He fired 3 steel pings, he grinned. "Your turn, mathlete." She adjusted her scope, breathed. 4th figure in the alley, radio, possible spotter, I'd eliminate him first. "There's no 4th target," Briggs snapped. She squeezed the trigger, ping. A beat, then the instructor's voice over comms. "Correct call, spotter was hidden, excellent ID." Briggs' grin vanished. He scanned through his scope, found the target he had missed. She stood, slung her rifle, walked away, no smirk, no triumph, just silence. That night the whispers changed. She's not just sharp, she's scary sharp. But whispers alone don't give belonging. Some men don't yield ground so easily, especially not to someone younger, quieter, and a woman. They said she was too analytical, that she'd freeze when blood spilled, that she'd hesitate when hesitation killed. She heard it all. She logged that too, and answered not with words but preparation, adjusting the trigger tension until it fit her hand like breath, recalculating data under live wind, building spreadsheets of heat distortion. Her bunk transformed into a war lab, lit by a single flashlight long after the rest had gone to sleep. Found her there one night, scribbling wind charts while others dreamed. He dropped a tray of food in front of her. "You ever sleep?" "Only when I've earned it." "And when will that be?" "When I make a shot that others think is impossible." He studied her. Every sniper hits a wall, some freeze, some panic, some just miss. You know what kills more shots than anything? She looked up. "What?" "Doubt." She nodded, absorbing it like another calculation. Days later, a classified briefing changed everything. A high-value warlord, long hunted, finally exposed. He would cross a cliff edge for only seconds. A ghost in no man's land where boots couldn't follow. The shot required was impossible. 2.1 miles, 3,560 meters. The kind of distance where bullets turned into whispers of probability. The SEALs shook their heads. Briggs scoffed. "That's a math problem with a miracle in the middle." Then silence fell as every eye turned to her. She didn't raise her hand, she just spoke steady. "I can do it." The room froze. "You understand this isn't practice," said slowly. "You miss, he vanishes, you'll have one chance, less than 3 seconds." "I understand. You'll only get one shot." Her voice didn't waver. "I only need one." For the first time, her silence carried weight. Not arrogance, not nerves, precision. "Tap the table, gear up, you've got 18 hours. As the others filed out, Briggs muttered, "She won't even pull the trigger." But she wasn't listening, she was already gone, mentally preparing, calculating the shot that would define not just her, but the way every man in that room saw her. She wasn't here to impress them. She wasn't here for respect. She was here for the shot no one else would dare take. And in that silence, she finally belonged. What kind of person volunteers for the impossible? The desert seemed to ask that question as the map unfolded across the briefing table. Jagged lines showed the mountain pass where the warlord would emerge. A red dot marked the ledge he would cross, a sliver of rock carved by centuries of wind. The problem was simple on paper, too simple. The ledge was visible for only 4 seconds, and the nearest viable firing position sat over 3,500 meters away, 2.1 miles, beyond the edge of doctrine, beyond the scope of probability. The SEALs studied the map with jaws tight. It's not just distance, one muttered. It's 7 seconds of bullet travel time. That's enough for him to step behind a rock, tie his boot, vanish. Another shook his head. I've stretched to 1,500, maybe 18, never past that. Briggs leaned back in his chair, smirking like he wanted to spit. That's not a shot, that's a lottery ticket. She sat silent, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the topographic lines. Her voice broke the quiet like a scalpel through cloth. There's a ridge point, slight elevation. It'll give partial visibility for 4.3 seconds. Heads turned. Partial visibility, Briggs scoffed. That's not enough. No, she replied. It's exactly enough. There's a thermal pocket mid-range. Heat shimmer will distort trajectory. If I fire slightly low, the distortion bends the path into alignment. 7.2 seconds of flight. Impact centered. From her cargo pocket she drew a notebook, pages filled with equations, wind charts, sketches of elevation, numbers inked until the paper nearly tore from pressure. She slid it forward. Studied it, his brows tightening as he traced her handwriting bullet drop calculations to the millimeter spin drift accounted for. Earth rotation, humidity, mirage layers, each variable solved. Counterbalanced, mapped like scripture, he knew ballistics. And what he saw wasn't guesswork, it was obsession, sharpened into certainty. This isn't just possible, he said finally. It's terrifyingly accurate. But accuracy wasn't the only enemy. 7 seconds of flight, that was an eternity, time for the wind to shift, for his foot to fall a fraction faster, for her heartbeat to betray her grip. Looked at her, trying to read past the calm in her face. You're confident. Yes, sir. You know if you miss, he walks. I won't miss. She didn't say it loudly, she didn't lean forward to prove it. She said it like fact, a law written in silence. Later, under a sun that burned everything flat and merciless, she scouted the ridge. The position wasn't forgiving, uneven slope, loose shale that slid under her boots. The air shimmered like liquid, twisting reality. The wind came in bursts, playful and cruel, shifting direction without warning. Any other sniper would have cursed the terrain. She studied it. She tied ribbons to posts, watching them curl. She charted gust intervals. She held her hand in the air until she could feel direction changes in her fingertips. When the tech team offered a ballistic computer to help with the shot, she shook her head. I do better on paper. Nearby, SEAL spotters assembled digital overlays. She declined those too. She trusted her eyes, her notes, the math in her bones. At dusk, she lay in the dirt, cheek against the rifle stock, not firing, just watching, counting seconds between gusts, listening to the silence of her own breath. A young Marine walked past, slowing at the sight of her prone silhouette against the red horizon. You look like a sniper, he said. Her voice didn't shift. No, I look like someone who refuses to miss. That night in the barracks, others celebrated with cards, jokes, loud laughter over thin beer. She sat cross-legged on her bunk, notebook open, writing variables again and again. Wind, elevation, angle, bullet weight, heartbeat. She rehearsed them like prayers. Found her there as he always seemed to. He leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the glow of her flashlight on the pages. You're not going to sleep, are you? I won't sleep well until it's over. He walked in, crouched beside her bunk, glanced over the endless columns of numbers. You know, if you pull this off, they'll talk about it for decades. She didn't look up. I don't need them to talk, I just need the bullet to land. His laugh was soft, tired, fair enough. By dawn, she was already on the ridge again. The valley lay stretched beneath her, an ocean of sand and jagged stone. The outcrop felt like standing at the edge of the world. She dug the bipod deep into the dirt, checked every angle, rechecked. Then sat still for hours, not shooting, just watching, becoming part of the terrain. As the hours stretched, doubt drifted back through the ranks like smoke. Briggs said it loudly enough for others to hear. "She won't even pull the trigger, you'll see." Some nodded, relieved to cling to skepticism. Better to believe in her failure than in the quiet possibility that she might succeed where they never could. But she heard none of it, or rather she did, but she didn't let it land. Words were just another variable, and she had already solved for silence. That evening she cleaned the like it was sacred. Every inch of barrel polished, every screw checked, every moving part tested until it whispered smoothness. She had custom-loaded her rounds for long-range stability. Match-grade brass measured like jewels. She disassembled, reassembled, disassembled again, until the weapon wasn't a tool anymore. It was an extension of her breath. When the sun fell, she lay prone again, cheek against the stock, eyes tracing the ledge 2 miles away. She visualized it hundreds of times, the silhouette appearing, the scope aligning, the squeeze, the thunder, the weight, 7.2 seconds of silence stretching into eternity. She practiced it in her mind until it was no longer imagination. It was memory of the future. Approached, crouching beside her in the dust, the twilight painted his face in bronze. "You know, there are men who would kill to take this shot, to own the record." She didn't glance away from her scope. Then why didn't they volunteer? His mouth twitched. "Because they don't believe it can be done." "I do. And what happens if you're wrong?" Finally she turned to him. Her eyes were steady, unblinking. "Then the warlord walks free, and the record stays unbroken. But if I don't try, then I'll never know if the shot was possible." There was no arrogance in it, only necessity. At 4:30, the desert valley exhaled into morning gray. The world seemed to hold its breath. She lay flat on the ridge, cheek to stock, hands steady on her spotter knelt beside her. Binoculars pressed tight, his voice low, nervous. "Target expected in 2 minutes." She flicked the safety off. One shot, that was all she'd have. Briggs' voice crackled faintly over comms. "You know he's going to move fast, right? He's not going to stand there for you." She didn't answer. Words didn't matter. She adjusted the scope, dialed wind hold, and exhaled until her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the earth. Somewhere below, a man was walking into history. He didn't know it yet. Neither did the men behind her, shifting nervously as the seconds ticked. But she knew she had seen it already. And when the figure appeared against the rock ledge, the world narrowed to one breath, one squeeze, one eternal silence. What does 7 seconds feel like when the world holds its breath? The desert valley was painted in fragile gray as the first light of dawn cracked the horizon. Air so dry it stung the lungs. Heat shimmer not yet fully risen but already ghosting across the stone. Silence heavier than armor. On the ridge, she lay prone, cheek pressed to the stock of the body melted into the dirt as if she had grown from the earth itself. Her spotter, Corporal, shifted beside her, binoculars locked, words hushed like prayers. "Target expected in 30 seconds." His voice lacked its usual bravado. He wasn't sure if what he was about to witness was even possible. Her eyes never left the scope. She wasn't watching the ledge. She was watching numbers in her head. Wind. 12 miles an hour, gusting east to west, barometric pressure low, elevation 5,600 feet, bullet flight. 7.2 seconds, drop. More than 400 inches, spin drift. 57 right, she recited it silently, matching rhythm to her breath until the math was no longer math but pulse. Murmured again, 5 seconds, 4-3. Through the scope the ledge shimmered, mirage waves distorting reality like a heat-borne mirage. For a heartbeat it was empty. Then movement. A silhouette, broad-shouldered, cloaked in dark fabric. He walked casually across the ledge, unaware that 2 miles away an eye had locked onto him. Visual confirmed, whispered target in the open. The SEAL tent miles away erupted with chatter. Voices crackled through comms, disbelief already creeping into their tone. This wasn't training. This was history about to be tested. Her breath slowed, her finger touched the trigger guard, not yet curling. She imagined the bullet leaving, arcing through 2 miles of invisible chaos, slipping through wind layers, beating physics into obedience. She imagined it finding home. The ledge narrowed, he was mid-step. The window was already shrinking. His voice shook. 2.1 miles, dead center, you good? She didn't answer, she wasn't there. She was ahead of the bullet, racing through air, calculating every drift, every invisible hand that might try to push it off course. She took one final breath, held it, the world stilled. The thundered. The recoil slammed into her shoulder like a train, but she had long since learned to ride the wave. Dust leapt from the ground. The sound cracked across the valley, echoing against ancient stone until it felt like the earth itself had fired. And then nothing. Silence. The shot was gone, but the world hadn't caught up yet. The bullet flew invisible, tearing through layers of atmosphere. 1 second, 2, 3. The warlord kept walking, unhurried, as though fate wasn't already streaking toward him. 4, 5, muttered under his breath. Come on, 6. At 7.2, the figure jerked, then folded. No stagger, no scream, no slow collapse, just sudden stillness, as though the strings holding him up had been cut. His body crumpled into the dust of the ledge and lay unmoving. Impact confirmed, gasped. Hit confirmed. He's down, oh my God, you hit him. The comms erupted, voices overlapping. Target is down. Repeat, target down. Hit him, holy hell, that's a record, do you see this? Back at base, men crowded the monitors as the drone feed replayed. The warlord's body sprawled lifeless across the cliff edge. No movement, no second shot, one trigger pull, one kill. At a distance most had only whispered about in myth. Even Briggs sat frozen, headset slack around his neck. His smirk had drained long before, replaced by a hollow disbelief. He wasn't watching a sniper. He was watching the impossible fold into reality. On the ridge, turned to her, eyes wide, voice stammering. You actually did it. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. She clicked the safety on, slowly lifted her cheek from the stock, began packing though with the same precision she'd shown the night before. It was just a shot, she said softly. Stared at her incredulous, just a shot. That was the shot of the decade, no one else, no one. She zipped her rifle case shut. Insane would have been not trying. They descended the ridge in silence, leaving behind the ledge where a ghost had fallen. At the base, word had already spread like wildfire. SEALs who had mocked her now crowded around the replay feed, watching it again and again, trying to understand how she had done it, how she had calculated the arc, how she had kept her breath steady for 7 eternal seconds, how silence had carried more weight than bravado ever could. Briggs didn't speak. For the first time, he had nothing clever to say. When she entered the compound, eyes followed her, not with scorn now, but with something heavier, respect, confusion, maybe fear. She walked with the same calm stride, eyes low, gear strapped. Nothing changed except everything had. Was waiting, he didn't salute, didn't clap her on the back, he only said, "Come with me." The op room smelled of stale coffee and dust. A colonel stood waiting, skin leathery from years of war, voice like steel wrapped in gravel. He stared at her for a long moment. "You're the one who made that shot?" "Yes, sir." He lifted a printout from the drone feed, showing the exact frame when the warlord collapsed. "Do you understand what you've done?" "Yes, sir." "You just changed the rules of engagement. A 2.1 mile confirmed kill, no follow-up, no hesitation. Do you realize there's a press office already waiting to turn you into a story?" Her voice stayed flat. "I'm not interested in fame, sir." "Then what are you interested in?" "Precision and preparation." The colonel looked at, then back at her, his jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, But there was no point, he saw it now. She wasn't chasing recognition. She was chasing something deeper, something more dangerous. "Dismissed," he said finally. She left the room as quietly as she had entered. That night the cook rolled out frozen ice cream from a stash no one knew existed. A silent celebration, not official, but everyone understood why. Men clapped shoulders, laughed nervously, replayed the shot again on grainy screens. They called her the ghost sniper now, whispered the nickname like superstition. She sat at a corner table alone, spoon scraping soft vanilla, slid into the seat across from her, studying her. "You good?" he asked. She looked up briefly. "I'm thinking about the drop. I might have overcompensated. Wind shifted last second. Next time I'll adjust." He chuckled. "Next time. There's always a next time." Then she turned back to her notebook, already writing, already preparing, because legends aren't built in the moment of applause. They're built in the silence that follows. By dawn, the world knew through encrypted channels, whispered calls, reports stamped classified. The Pentagon analysts stared at paused frames, whispering disbelief. 2.1 miles, rookie, one shot, kill confirmed. In sniper schools across continents, it spread like rumor. Was it luck? Was she even real? Had someone else pulled the trigger? She didn't care. She didn't even hear. Back in the armory, she disassembled the again, cleaned every part as if she were honoring glass. She wasn't celebrating. She was listening to silence, as though it carried the only answer she needed. How does a single bullet travel further than the rifle that fired it? By dawn, the shot had outrun her, long before she stripped it down for cleaning, long before she filed her calculations into a worn notebook. Encrypted reports were already flashing across secure networks. Analysts in dim-lit Pentagon offices watched the grainy footage on repeat. A silhouette stepping across a ledge, the thunder of a rifle echoing across miles of barren stone, a man folding into the dust without pause, without drama, without chance. It was undeniable. 2.1 miles, a single shot, a confirmed kill. The reaction wasn't disbelief. It was disruption. The sniper community, closed and elite, was suddenly forced to redraw its maps. Instructors who had sworn students would never exceed 1,500 yards now whispered her name like it was a riddle. Who is she? Was it luck? Was it staged? Some dismissed it, others leaned closer to the replay, unable to look away. Back at the outpost, she ignored it all. Fame was for men who measured worth in noise. She measured hers in silence, while others buzzed with speculation. She sat at her workbench with the strip to pieces, cleaning carbon residue with the reverence of ritual. Every groove polished, every chamber checked, not for glory, for respect, for the weapon, for the physics, for the moment that demanded perfection. Entered quietly, leaning against the doorway. "They don't believe you did it alone," he said. "High Command wants to know if there was satellite assistance, if the drone operator corrected the call. They think someone else pulled the trigger." She didn't look up. "I didn't do it alone." He raised an eyebrow. "I had wind, gravity, and math." For a moment, he almost laughed, but the gravity in her voice held him silent. He nodded instead, watching her reassemble the rifle with hands steady enough to shame the doubts of men continents away. The SEALs had changed too. The jokes dried up. Briggs no longer muttered in her shadow. Some nodded as she passed, awkwardly, as though respect was a foreign language they were learning for the first time. Even those who said nothing couldn't look at her the way they once had. Briggs approached her at lunch 2 days later. He didn't sit. He just hovered, scratching the back of his neck. "You practiced a lot, didn't you?" Her spoon paused over the tin tray. She didn't look up. "Yes." "You were right, that wasn't luck." "No, it wasn't." He nodded once, then walked away. No apology, no concession, but silence where mockery used to be. Watched the exchange from a distance. He shook his head, almost amused. "You didn't just make the longest shot in years," he said later. "You silenced an entire SEAL unit. That might be more impressive." She didn't smile. Silence wasn't a victory. It was survival. Within days, the footage reached men whose names never appeared in newspapers, generals, intelligence directors, policymakers who stared at wars like pieces on a chessboard. General, known for a zero-nonsense approach to strategy, watched the clip twice before muttering, "We need her." An informal message was drafted. She received it on a tablet one night in her bunk, the words clinical and heavy. "You are requested to report to, potential reassignment pending. Your is considered critical level expertise. You may decline." She stared at the message for a long time across from her, watched her expression shift only slightly, like wind brushing over stone. "You're not going to take it," he said. Her reply was simple. "I didn't come here to teach, I came here to learn." But the world had already decided otherwise. Whispers hardened into doctrine. Military schools drafted a new manual based on her data, her obsessive notes, her silent routines. They called it the Kane Doctrine. Wind calculation elevated to ritual, ballistics drilled until they became second nature. No shortcuts, no lucky shots, every bullet earned, every variable memorized. And yet she stayed the same: dawn workouts, range adjustments, nightly observation logs written in that same leather notebook until the ink smudged her fingertips. She didn't chase headlines. She didn't grant interviews. She remained the ghost. Until the message came. Gates opened to her one fog-draped morning, not with applause, not with salutes. Two intelligence officers met her, stiff and cold, escorting her into a facility known only as the Vault. The air smelled of steel and secrecy. Inside, she met Colonel, decorated, dead-eyed, his stare like a scalpel cutting past pretense. "You changed things," he said without preamble. "Every sniper doctrine, every training model shattered, you understand that?" She nodded once. "The enemy does too. They're watching, studying, learning. You didn't just make a kill, you made a message." He handed her a folder. Heavy inside, pages of maps, names, reconnaissance data, faces of young recruits, notes scribbled in margins, psychological profiles, weapon aptitudes, potential, a girl from Kentucky, a boy from Montana, instincts sharp as glass. "They'll listen to you," said. "You're what they want to become." She stared at the folder, fingers still. Her throat tightened with something she didn't have a name for. She hadn't come here to teach. She hadn't come to be a symbol. She came to keep her edge sharp, to honor the silence between shots. "They don't need a myth," she said. "Then give them something real." And so she stayed. Weeks blurred into months. She became a silent mentor, brutal in standards, merciless in preparation, but never loud, never seeking. Her students emerged different. They could smell shifts in humidity. They could recite ballistics in reverse under stress. They learned the truth she carried. There are no lucky shots. The military drafted the Kane Doctrine into training manuals, spreading her gospel across units and schools. Her name never printed. Her face never shown. But her legend grew anyway. Commanders referenced her shot in briefings. Instructors told recruits about the rookie who silenced doubt with a bullet that flew further than reason. Some believed it, others didn't. She didn't care. One night visited her at. He found her alone in the simulation dome, firing at targets barely visible against darkness. No night scope, just feel, just silence. "You've built a storm here," he said. "I'm just giving them what I didn't have," she replied. He sat beside her on the bench. "What about you? You ever going back into the field?" She chambered another round, eyes forward. "Maybe not for glory, no, to keep the edge sharp." That was always it, the edge, the silence between breaths where everything had to be perfect. That's where she lived. And somewhere in the silence, she began to wonder if being a ghost was enough, or if becoming a myth had already been decided for her. What does it feel like to watch someone else live the shot you once carried alone? By the third month her name had already vanished into black ink. Officially, she was Echo 7, a whispered in war rooms but never spoken outside. Unofficially, she was a ghost turned doctrine across training grounds, Recruits who had never met her recited equations she'd scratched in notebooks under dim light. They traced wind currents with their hands in silence, mimicking the way she had once done under the desert sun. They thought they were learning a skill. They didn't know they were carrying fragments of her. She didn't tell them, she never told them. Her students only knew her as the woman who demanded perfection and gave nothing less. She was not loud, not motivational, not the kind of instructor who fueled men with fire. Her fuel was colder, sharper. She made them memorize ballistic charts backward in the dark. She made them strip rifles down blindfolded until their fingers no longer trembled. She made them lie prone in wind tunnels for hours, breathing against chaos. Not allowed to fire a single round, until they could predict the gusts with accuracy of heartbeat. Some cursed her, some broke under the weight of her silence, but those who endured walked out different, harder, quieter. Precision became religion, and she was its reluctant prophet. Her methods began seeping out in Syria. A young Marine from Montana, one of hers, made a confirmed kill at 1,920 meters. His voice over comms was steady, calm, unnervingly familiar. Target down, first shot. She heard the recording later in a secured room. She didn't smile, but she nodded once quietly, as though affirming that the silence had traveled. In Eastern Europe, a 19-year-old girl from Kentucky, her Kentucky recruit, calculated an impossible headwind, disabled a hostile vehicle with a single 338 round, saved a platoon from being overrun. Report said she called the shot with mechanical calm. Report said her teammates stared at her the way the SEALs had once stared at. Every echo was confirmation, but every echo also weighed heavy, because watching them succeed meant remembering the cost of failure. She had carried that weight alone once. Now it lived in them. Was that mercy or cruelty? She never answered herself. She just kept teaching. The manuals began changing. Where once sniper doctrine emphasized instinct, now it emphasized silence. Where once recruits were told to trust their gut, now they were told to trust math, trust wind, trust preparation. They called it the Kane Doctrine. She hated the name. It wasn't hers, it was the silence. But no one listened when she said it. Sometimes she found herself awake at 300, staring at her hands, wondering if she had made a mistake. Precision demanded perfection, but perfection demanded pieces of the soul. Could these students survive carrying the same weight? Or would it hollow them as it had hollowed her? One evening she stood in the range dome, watching a recruit fire at 1,400 meters. The shot went wide by inches. The girl cursed, lowered her rifle, face flushed. Again, said. I adjusted, the recruit argued. You trusted adjustment, replied, not the wind. The girl frowned, but I calculated. Crouched beside her, voice even. Numbers lie when you don't listen, listen harder. The girl swallowed, raised the rifle again. This time she closed her eyes, breathed, felt the shift in the air before aligning the scope. The shot cracked, center hit. The dome went silent, the girl exhaled, trembling, didn't smile. That's how you survive. The student nodded. She didn't yet know what it meant to survive, but she would. Visited again weeks later, he watched from the observation deck as her recruits lined up like shadows in formation, firing in rhythm, each shot measured, calm. He leaned on the railing beside her. You've made yourself obsolete, he said. She glanced at him. Your training replacement's better than you. You know that, right? They won't be better, she said softly. They'll just be enough. Enough for what? For the next war. Her words lingered in the air, heavier than gunpowder. That night, she sat alone in her quarters, reading over a file sent from Field Command. A Canadian sniper team had requested her ballistic notes on the 2.1-mile shot. Another unit in the Middle East had replicated her wind calculation drills. Her silence was spreading faster than she could contain it. And then the message that caught her off guard, a direct transmission, the sender. Master Chief Grant, retired Navy SEAL sniper, holder of one of the longest confirmed shots before hers. His name was legend in the community, etched into memory like a scar. She read his words twice. Heard about your shot. You didn't just break a record, you set a new standard. Respect. She powered the tablet off, stared at the darkness. She didn't want respect. Respect was noise, precision was silence. Still, the message echoed longer than she admitted. Weeks later, during an evaluation exercise, one of her Montana recruits made a call so sharp it felt like. She watched through the glass as he whispered wind shifts seconds before the shot. His voice carried the same unshakable calm she once carried alone. When his round hit dead center, the other recruits gasped. He just nodded, chambered another. She exhaled, a faint release of something she couldn't name, pride, fear, both. Afterward, alone in the dim hallway, she pressed her palms to the wall and let herself feel it. The strange ache of seeing pieces of herself carried by others. The relief that the silence didn't end with her. The dread that maybe it should have. Later that night, she returned to the range. The moon hung silver over the lane. She set her against the bipod, chambered around, adjusted the scope. A target shimmered barely visible at 3,000 meters. She breathed in, exhaled, pulled. The silence after the shot told her everything. She still had it. But she also knew. The edge wasn't hers alone anymore. It belonged to the echoes she had left behind. What happens when the silence calls you back? 3 years had passed since the desert, 3 years of classrooms without walls, recruits carrying fragments of her voice into wars she never saw. Her name had dissolved into and whispers. To most of the world, she didn't exist. To the few who did, she was Echo 7, the ghost sniper whose silence became doctrine. And then the call came. Encrypted, hardened line buried in its basement, a frequency accessed by fewer than 5. She sat alone when the speaker crackled alive. A voice she knew, older now, but still steady. "We've got something." She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. Some part of her had always known silence would call her back. She packed the without ceremony, cleaned it one last time, loaded her custom rounds, and when the helicopter blades roared above the training ground that night, she climbed aboard without looking back at the students who watched her vanish into shadow. The mission was NATO, the location, Eastern Alps. A rogue general with ties that reached too far had seized a bioresearch facility. Hostages inside, encryption systems armed, time ticking toward catastrophe. The SEAL team deployed wasn't supposed to engage, recon only, but they walked into an ambush. 3 dead, 2 pinned was running Overwatch. And the only way out was a shot only she could take. The terrain was merciless, white peaks rising like knives into a bruised sky, fog curling off, heavy and shifting, air thin, oxygen stripped from the lungs with every breath. Her boots crunched over ice as she climbed with her spotter, a younger Marine whose hands trembled against the metal of his scope. He was green, too green, his fear was thick in the air. She didn't resent him for it. She remembered being young, but she had no patience for panic now. She studied the map in the snowlight, distance. 26 miles, elevation dropped sharp, crosswinds curled off the cliffs, invisible knives waiting to cut her calculation, visibility low, hostages clustered below the target. Her voice was calm, flat. "I'll need 11.2 mils vertical, 1.9 left." The spotter blinked, startled. You got that already." She glanced at him once, always. They climbed higher, breath fogging, muscles burning. The younger Marine wheezed behind her, boots sliding on shale, lungs not yet trained for thin air. She didn't slow. Oxygen burned her own chest, but she carried it like weight on her back, expected, necessary. At the perch, she set the down in snow packed tight as stone, dug the bipod deep, adjusted scope. Her gloves moved slow, deliberate, as if the weapon were fragile glass. The young spotter muttered into comms. Target faint, barely visual through fog. She saw him, a dark outline moving near the facility, packing like a shadow behind the hostages, the general. Her stomach tightened. Not from fear, but from the clarity of inevitability. This was why the silence had called her back, to prove she hadn't dulled, to remind her what edges were for. She lay prone, cheek pressed against cold steel. The scope narrowed the world into a tunnel of fog and distance. She closed her eyes for one breath, long and steady, letting her mind race ahead of the bullet. She saw the path, the drift, the delay. 7 seconds was once eternity. Now it would be longer. Through fog, the general stepped back from the hostages, coat flashing as he gestured. A window, 1 second, maybe less. She exhaled, squeezed. The roared, louder than thunder, the recoil buried into her shoulder, but she rode it, let it pass through her body into the frozen earth. The bullet vanished into fog. 1 second, 2, 3, the world didn't move. The hostages froze, crouched low. The general kept shouting 4, 5, 6, the spotter's voice cracked, come on. 7, 8. And then impact. The general dropped as if cut from strings. No scream, no stumble, just collapse, final, silent. The hostages scrambled away, guards shouting in chaos, SEALs surged in, fast and precise. Within minutes the facility was clear, no casualties added, no alarms tripped, the rogue general gone. She didn't wait for applause, she never did. She clicked the safety on. Chambered clear, disassembled with hands that had never shaken. The young spotter just stared, binoculars slack in his grip. His breath fogged the air. You just hit 2.6 miles. His voice was disbelief wrapped in awe. Through fog, through wind, that's not possible. She zipped the rifle case. Insane would have been not trying. The phrase fell from her lips without thought, the same way she had once said it on a ridge of sand years ago. Back in Washington, the war room replayed the footage on loop. Analysts whispered like children trading ghost stories. She did it again. 2.6 miles in the Alps, impossible. Someone muttered, she's a ghost. Arms crossed, watching the feed with tired eyes, shook his head. No, she's the echo. And silence filled the room. Back at she returned to the range at dawn. Students lined up, rifles gleaming in gray light. They didn't know what had happened in the Alps. They didn't need to. She gave no speeches, no stories. She only said, eyes on, mind clear, make every bullet count. They obeyed. One girl, barely 18, face sharp with determination, raised her rifle, fired at 1,100 yards, hit center, nodded once. Another echo formed. Another shadow carrying silence forward. She didn't tell them about the Alps. She didn't tell them about fog or distance or the thin air that burned her lungs. Some truths didn't need to be spoken. Because sometimes silence carries further than words, further even than a bullet. And in that silence she found herself again, not as a myth, not as a teacher, not even as a sniper, but as what she always had been. A ghost. What happens when a ghost becomes a storm? 3 years passed after the Alps and her name still never appeared in public. No magazine covers, no official commendation, no parades. On paper she was an instructor, buried in the folds of black ink files. Her assignments labeled classified and her students labeled unacknowledged. But across special operations, her legend became scripture. It began as rumor, a sniper who hit a warlord at 21 miles, a ghost who returned years later to erase a general at 26. Whispers moved faster than encrypted networks in training grounds in Europe. Recruits repeated her drills, calling them echo sets in South America. Instructors demanded wind calls be memorized forward and backward, the way echo would. Even in allied nations who weren't supposed to know her name, someone always had a story. A rookie who silenced SEALs, a woman who turned silence into doctrine, a ghost whose bullet flew further than belief. She didn't speak of it, not once. She still woke before dawn, still walked the range with her slung across her back, still scribbled equations until ink smudged her knuckles. But she could feel it now. Her silence no longer belonged only to her. It belonged to everyone who invoked her legend to train harder, to shoot, to breathe calmer. and sometimes that weight pressed harder than recoil. She stood in the dome one night, watching recruits cycle through live-fire drills. A boy no older than 19 held his breath too long, trembling as he tried to line up a target. His shot went wide, he cursed. "Again," she said. His voice cracked, "Ma'am, I." "Again." He exhaled, chambered another, tried once more. This time he trusted breath instead of fighting it. The round cracked, center hit, he gasped. The others clapped. She didn't, she only said, "Now you understand why silence matters." The recruits looked at her like disciples look at scripture. She turned away before they could ask questions she would never answer. Later in her quarters, she sat with her notebook open. Not numbers this time, words, a line she wrote, then crossed out, then wrote again. A bullet can change a war, but silence changes everything else. She hated the way it sounded. Too much like something people would quote, too much like legacy. She closed the notebook, shoved it under her bunk, and tried to sleep. But sleep never came easy anymore. The Pentagon had already begun codifying her methods into global doctrine. Manuals changed. Curriculums shifted across NATO. Sniper schools rewrote their standards around her equations. Her patience, her obsessive detail. Commanders spoke of the Kane effect, how preparation outweighed bravado, how silence could be lethal. She despised the phrase. She wasn't an effect, she was a person, but the world preferred myths to people. Visited again, older now, lines deeper on his face, hair thinner, but his eyes still carrying that same weight of seeing too much. He found her on the range at night, firing into darkness without night vision, listening to the wind. "You know," he said, settling beside her, "you've built something bigger than yourself." She didn't lower her rifle. "I didn't ask to." "Doesn't matter if you asked, it's already out there. Manuals, schools, even foreign units are using your doctrine." She fired again, the sound echoed off the walls, sharp and cold. "Doctrine doesn't keep people alive, people keep people alive." He studied her profile in the dim light. "So, what are you going to do when they stop seeing you as a person?" She didn't answer, she didn't have one. The following week, she received a classified packet inside. Photos of operations across the globe, recruits she. Once trained, now veterans, now shadows of their own. The Montana sniper who had carried her calm into Syria. The Kentucky sharpshooter whose bullet had saved a platoon. Their reports mirrored her own once. Steady voices in chaos, precision where panic should have been. She stared at their faces longer than she meant to. They were carrying pieces of her silence, but were they also carrying her weight? At 300, she found herself back at the range. Alone, snow clung to the edges of the field, the air biting cold. She set up at 3,000 meters, chambered around, let her breath curl into the night. She fired once. The silence after the shot lingered longer than the echo. She whispered into it, almost to herself, "I still have it." But the silence didn't answer back. Weeks later, she sat in a secure briefing room. High-ranking officers across branches stared at her from across the table. She had not volunteered to be there. Orders brought her. One general cleared his throat. "Sergeant, your contributions have already altered doctrine at every level. We're considering formal recognition. A medal, public, of course, face, name, history. You'd be a symbol. You'd inspire." She looked at him evenly. "I don't want medals." "You've earned them." "I don't want them." The general leaned back, frustrated, sat in the corner, silent, watching. Another officer interjected. "With respect, Sergeant, the world needs heroes, your record-breaking shots, your doctrine. They're already public in whispers. Better we control the story than let rumor run wild." Her voice was quiet, unflinching. "Heroes die, silence survives." The room fell quiet. Finally spoke. "You're not going to win this argument with her. She won't take the medal. She won't take the stage. Let her stay a ghost. That's what makes her dangerous." The officers exchanged looks. No one spoke again. She walked out without a backward glance. That night she sat alone in her bunk, rifle across her knees, notebook open. She wrote a single line. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed the book. Outside, whispers spread faster than she could silence them. The myth was out of her hands now, and she wondered, was that legacy? Or just another kind of noise? How does a legend end when it was never meant to begin? By the fourth year, she no longer questioned whether the silence belonged to her. It belonged to the world now. It belonged to every recruit who whispered wind calls into the night, every commander who invoked her name in secret briefings, every myth that painted her shot as miracle instead of math. She had become something she never wanted to be, a story. But stories don't carry rifles, people do. She still rose before dawn, still walked the range before anyone else arrived. Snow in winter, sweat in summer. Her remained her only constant, heavy and honest, cleaned more carefully than she ever cared for herself. Students came and went, some broke, some endured. A few carried her silence forward like an inheritance. And each time she watched one succeed, pride and dread knotted in her chest like twin threads. It was during one of those dawn sessions that found her again. Older now, his gait slower, his breath heavier, but his presence unchanged. He leaned against the railing of the range, arms crossed, eyes narrowed against the wind. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked. She chambered a round, lined up at 2,000 yards and fired. The steel plate rang a second later, clear and sharp. Stopping what? Teaching, shooting, carrying all of this. She reloaded, her movements deliberate. And do what instead? He smirked faintly, live. The shot cracked again. Another hit. She lowered the rifle, finally glancing at him. This is living. He studied her for a long time. He wanted to argue, but there was no argument against the way she breathed easier only when her cheek pressed to steel, when her silence echoed louder than applause. He left without another word. That night she received another call, not from the Pentagon this time, from the field. A NATO unit caught in a stalemate in the Caucasus. Enemy snipers pinning them down. Civilians trapped, no air support cleared. The request was simple, one impossible shot to break the hold. She didn't hesitate. They flew her under moonlight, face hidden under cloth, rifle strapped to her chest. The insertion point was brutal. Cliffs rising like jagged teeth, wind howling through valleys with no rhythm. The spotter assigned to her was young again, nervous again, eyes wide at the thought of what they were about to attempt. She crouched over the map, tracing lines with a gloved finger. One shot, 2.9 miles, crosswind unpredictable, time of flight 10 seconds. The spotter's throat bobbed. 10 seconds, that's. She silenced him with a glance. Insane would be not trying. The climb was punishing, air thinner than memory. Each breath felt like pulling glass into her lungs, but she carried it. She always had. At the perch, she lay prone, set the against ice-cold rock, and let the world shrink into the tunnel of her scope. Through the glass, she saw him, enemy sniper, patient, deadly. His scope trained down on civilians huddled behind broken stone. He didn't know he was being watched from nearly 3 miles away. She closed her eyes for one breath, saw the path, saw the delay, saw the silence waiting at the end. When she opened them again, the world had narrowed to one equation. She squeezed. The cracked, louder than thunder against the cliffs. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, familiar and final. 1 second, 2, 3. The enemy sniper kept waiting. 4, 5, 6. He shifted slightly. Unaware. 7, 8, 9. Impact. His head snapped back, body slumping over the rifle. His shot never fired. The civilians below didn't know what saved them. The NATO unit moved in, breaking the siege. The mission ended before it began. She clicked the safety on, cleared chamber, packed her rifle with the same deliberate calm she always had. The young spotter stared at her, lips parted. That was, I don't even have words. She did only one, silence. And that was all. Back at she returned to her students, No story told, no hint of where she had been, only the same command she had always given. Eyes on, mind clear, make every bullet count. But the whispers were louder now. 2.1, 2.6, 2.9, numbers that shouldn't be real, distances that bent the line between man and myth. And every time the numbers spread, she retreated deeper into silence, clinging to the only truth she trusted. The bullet is real. The silence is real. The myth is noise. Years blurred, students became instructors. Instructors became soldiers across the world when a sniper called wind with perfect calm. When a bullet landed where no one believed possible, someone always asked the question, was that one of hers? The answer never came. One night, older now, hair streaked with gray at her temples, she walked alone to the range. Moonlight bathed the targets. She set her on the bipod, chambered a round, and aimed at 3,000 meters. Her hands were slower now, her eyes not as sharp, but the silence was still hers. She exhaled, pulled. The steel rang. She closed her eyes, resting her cheek against the stock, and for the first time let herself feel something she had never allowed before. Not pride, not relief, acceptance. She had never wanted medals, never wanted headlines, never wanted myth. All she ever wanted was precision, preparation, silence, and she had lived in it. By dawn she was gone, no ceremony, no farewell, just her bunk left clean, her locked in the armory, her notebook placed neatly on her desk. On the last page, a single line written in steady hand. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in every distant battlefield where silence hung heavy before a shot, she was still there, not as a name, not as a face, not even as a ghost. As an echo,